Have you ever sacrificed everything for the people you loved, only to discover they wanted your money, but not your presence? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I spent 3 years saving for the perfect family vacation. Every dollar I earned, every little luxury I gave up, every dream I carried in my heart led to one destination. Then, just 48 hours before we were supposed to leave, one text message destroyed everything. At first, I thought my heart had stopped. But what happened next, no one in my family saw coming. At exactly 11:02 on a quiet Thursday night, my phone buzzed. I smiled before I even picked it up, expecting another excited message about Hawaii. Maybe my grandson asking if we'd really see sea turtles. Maybe Nathan reminding me not to forget the sunscreen. Instead, I read words I will never forget. Mom, you won't be joining us. Tanya thinks it's better if this vacation is just for her family. You've already done your part by paying. I stared at the screen, reading the message again and again. Surely I had misunderstood. Surely my own son couldn't mean what those words suggested. Another notification appeared before I could even process the first. Please don't take it personally. It's just simpler this way. Simpler. Such a small word. Yet it managed to erase 3 years of love in a single sentence. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The phone slowly dimmed until the screen went black, leaving me staring at my own reflection. The kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator humming softly in the corner only minutes earlier. I had been happily packing tiny gift bags for my grandchildren. Each one held a little Hawaiian keychain that read, "Aloha. Grandma loves you." I'd wrapped every bag by hand, carefully sealing them with colorful ribbon because I wanted each child to feel special. My fingertips were still sticky from the tape. The travel-sized sunscreen bottles I'd sorted into labeled zipper. Bags were lined neatly across the counter. Everything was ready, everything. Except me. Nathan never called. He never apologized. He never even pretended to feel bad. One cold text, that was all it took for my own son to quietly remove me from the family vacation I had spent years creating, and somehow that hurt even more than being left behind. Looking back now, I realized the signs had been there all along. They weren't loud. They never are. Sometimes rejection doesn't arrive through shouting. Sometimes it arrives through silence, through being forgotten, through becoming invisible. Tanya had perfected that kind of invisibility. Whenever I told stories about the early years of my marriage, she'd politely smile, then immediately change the subject. If I tried helping with holiday dinners, she'd gently move my dishes to the side without saying a word. Birthday parties slowly moved to her mother's house. Holiday traditions changed without anyone asking what I thought. I'd usually find out the day before, always as an afterthought, but the moment that stayed with me happened months earlier at a restaurant. The waiter approached our table. Everyone ordered. When he asked if anyone needed anything else, Tanya answered before I could even open my mouth. "No, we're all set." She didn't look at me. She looked straight past me, as though I'd already disappeared. That tiny moment lasted only seconds. Yet somehow it told me everything. Still, no matter how distant Tanya became, I never imagined Nathan would allow this to happen. Not my Nathan, the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The teenager who bought me pink tulips every March because he remembered they were my favorite. The young man who once wrote inside a Mother's Day card, "Mom, you'll always be my hero." I still kept that card tucked inside my dresser drawer, even older than that. I still had a crayon drawing he made in 2nd grade. In the picture, I wore a bright red cape. Above my head he'd written in crooked little letters, "My mom saves the day." I smiled every time I looked at it. Now, it felt like I wasn't even part of the story anymore. My suitcase sat quietly beside the bedroom door. Inside were 2 summer dresses I hadn't worn in years, a framed photograph of my late husband, James, and 1 lavender candle. That candle meant everything to me. James loved lavender. Our honeymoon had been in Hawaii nearly 40 years ago, when we were young, broke, and hopelessly in love. I had imagined recreating 1 small piece of that memory. On our first evening at the beach, I wanted everyone to gather around the fire. I pictured my grandchildren standing barefoot in the sand. Nathan, beside me. The waves rolling gently behind us. We would light the candle together in James's memory. Maybe one of the children would ask, "Grandma, did Grandpa love Hawaii?" And I'd smile through happy tears before, answering, "He loved this place because it was where we first dreamed about our future, together." That single conversation was worth every dollar I'd saved. At least, that's what I believed, because I wasn't paying for a vacation. I was paying for a memory, a legacy, 1 last chance to bring my family together. Over the past 3 years, I'd planned every detail: the beachfront, villa, the flights. Airport, transportation, breakfast basket, snorkeling, lessons, the luau reservations. Even the walking paths had been carefully researched so Tanya's mother could comfortably enjoy them with her bad knee. I spent hours talking to travel agents, asking questions most people would have considered unnecessary. Were the mattresses soft enough for the children? Would the villa have enough shade during the afternoon? Could they arrange extra blankets for my youngest granddaughter because she always got cold? Every tiny detail mattered to me because that's what mothers do. We notice the things nobody else thinks about. And somehow, or after, everything was booked, after every payment cleared, after every dream had been carefully stitched. Together, I had become nothing more than the woman, paying the bill, an ATM useful, until I wasn't. I remained at the kitchen table long after midnight. The only light came from beneath the cabinets, stretching long shadows across the countertops. I'd cleaned only hours earlier. For a while. Didn't feel angry. I didn't even cry. I felt embarrassed. That I'd believed love automatically meant loyalty, embarrassed that I'd mistaken gratitude for entitlement, embarrassed that I had spent years building a dream for people who had quietly removed me from it. I reached for my phone. Maybe I should call Nathan. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe. But what was I supposed to say? "Please let me come"? No, my mother can survive heartbreak, but she should never have to beg for a seat at the table she built. So instead, I stood up, walked slowly into my home office, turned on my old laptop, and opened a folder labeled Hawaii Travel Fund. The balance appeared on the screen, $21,763.84. I stared at it for a long moment. 3 years of sacrifice, reduced to numbers. Little did I know. The next decision I made wouldn't just cancel a vacation. It would change every relationship in my life forever. For a long moment, I just stared at the number on the screen. $21,763.84. Most people would have seen a bank balance. I saw 3 years of my life. 3 years of saying, maybe next month. Every time I wanted something for myself. 3 years of choosing sacrifice over comfort. 3 years of believing I was building a memory my family would treasure long after I was gone. And now, the people I had done it for didn't even want me on the trip. The money hadn't appeared overnight. It started with an old mason jar hidden behind the flour container in my kitchen cabinet. I used to call it my dream jar. Nobody else knew about it. Every time I skipped buying something, a new sweater, takeout dinner, another novel from the bookstore, I dropped the money into that jar instead. $5, $10, sometimes only $2. It didn't seem like much, but hope has a funny way of growing quietly, month after month, year after year. The jar became an envelope. The envelope became a savings account. The savings account slowly became a dream. After retiring, I even started tutoring English online in the evenings. Some nights my eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. Other nights my arthritis made my fingers ache so badly I could barely type. Still, I kept going. I turned the thermostat down during winter and wore 2 pairs of socks instead. I cancelled cable television. I stopped buying my favorite tea. When friends invited me out to lunch, I smiled and said, "Maybe next time." They thought I was trying to save money. They never knew I was saving memories, because Hawaii wasn't just another vacation. It was where James and I had begun our life together. We were 24 years old, completely broke, madly in love. We shared one suitcase because baggage fees were too expensive. At lunchtime, we'd split sandwiches to make them last. James got sunburned so badly on the second day that he spent the rest of the honeymoon wearing a hotel bedsheet around his shoulders like a superhero cape. I laughed so hard I cried. He kept pretending to rescue tourists from imaginary dangers. Even strangers laughed with us. Whenever I thought about Hawaii, I never remembered the beaches first. I remembered his laugh. After he passed away, I made myself one quiet promise. One day, I'd bring the whole family back. Nathan would stand where his father once stood. My grandchildren would hear stories about the grandfather they never really had the chance to know. Maybe, just maybe. The place where our family began could remind everyone what family was supposed to mean. That dream carried me through some very lonely years. I planned every detail like it was the most important project of my life. Because to me, it was. I searched for villas big enough for everyone. 9 people under one roof. No one left out. I called the travel agency so many times the representative started recognizing my voice before I introduced myself. I asked about food allergies, extra pillows, wheelchair accessibility for Tanya's mother, kid-friendly beaches, quiet bedrooms for the little ones. I even ordered matching t-shirts. Across the front they read, "Family Forever." I smiled when the package arrived. I folded each shirt carefully into its own gift bag. I imagined everyone wearing them together for one big family photograph at sunset. I pictured hanging that photograph in my living room. Every morning I'd walk past it and remember. This was the trip that brought us closer. Funny how life can turn dreams into lessons. The truth is, I had already started disappearing long before that text message arrived. I simply refused to admit it. At Thanksgiving, Tanya always suggested taking one picture with just the kids, then one with just our little family, then another with her parents. By the time they finished, someone would glance at the clock. "Oh, we're losing the light." No one ever suggested one with me. Christmas wasn't much different. One year everyone arrived, wearing matching red sweaters decorated with little white trees. Mine was blue. I hadn't known there was a plan. Nathan laughed awkwardly. "You're not really into matching outfits anyway, Mom." I forced a smile. The truth, I would have worn anything if someone had simply asked me. Birthdays slowly moved to Tanya's mother's house. I still received invitations. But somehow, I always felt like a guest attending someone else's family gathering. Once I overheard Tanya introducing me to one of her friends. "Oh, this is Nathan's mom." Not, "This is Grandma." Not, "This is family." Just, "Nathan's mom." Like I'd wandered in from another table. People often imagine rejection as loud, arguments, slamming doors, cruel words. But that's rarely how it begins. Sometimes, it's the empty chair nobody notices, the family photo you're missing from, the conversation that continues after you've quietly left the room. Being forgotten doesn't happen all at once. It happens one small moment at a time. until one day you realize you're watching your own family from the outside. And somehow, they've gotten used to it. Still, I refused to give up. I convinced myself this trip would fix everything. Once we were together beneath the Hawaiian sky, once the children were laughing on the beach, once Nathan remembered where he came from, everything would be different. At least, that's the story I kept telling myself, until one sentence shattered it. You've already done your part by paying. I couldn't stop hearing those words, over and over and over again, suddenly every tutoring session, every cold winter night, every dollar I'd tucked into the dream jar, felt foolish. I hadn't been building a bridge back to my family. I'd been building something far more painful, a pedestal, one they expected me to stand beneath while they enjoyed the view. Later that night, I carried my suitcase back into the bedroom. I unpacked it slowly. The summer dresses went back into the closet. James's photograph returned to the dresser. Finally, I picked up the lavender candle. For several minutes, I simply held it in both hands. That candle had been meant for a family remembrance on the beach. Now, it was just another unopened dream. I placed it carefully beside James's picture. Then I whispered something I never imagined I'd have to say. When did I stop belonging to the family we created? The room stayed silent. Of course it did. Sometimes, silence answers questions words never can. The next morning I woke before sunrise. Not because I had somewhere to go, because sleep had become impossible. Nathan's message replayed in my mind like an echo that refused to fade. I wandered through the house without purpose, straightened photographs that were already straight, folded blankets that didn't need folding, wiped spotless kitchen counters. Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything except think. Then, an email notification appeared. At first, I almost ignored it. I assumed it was another grocery receipt. Instead, the subject line made my stomach tighten. Final Hawaii travel itinerary. I clicked it immediately. Every reservation I'd spent years arranging appeared neatly organized on the screen. Flights, airport transfers, villa check-in, rental cars, dinner reservations, snorkeling excursions. Everything. I scrolled slowly, almost proudly, until I reached the passenger list. There were 8 names. Nathan, Tanya, their children, Tanya's parents, her sister, her sister's boyfriend. 8. I frowned. Surely there had to be another page. I zoomed in, scrolled again, checked every attachment. Nothing. No 9th passenger. No separate booking. No alternate reservation. No Marilyn. No Mom. No Grandma. Nothing. For one desperate moment, I actually convinced myself it had to be a clerical mistake. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. They hadn't forgotten to book me. They had planned the entire vacation without me from the very beginning. And that realization hurt far more than the text ever could. I closed the laptop as gently as if it were made of glass. Not because I was afraid of breaking it, but because I felt like I already had. For several minutes, I just sat there, staring at the wall across the room. There it was, a framed family portrait taken 5 years earlier. James was gone by then, but Nathan stood beside me with one arm around my shoulders. The grandchildren were smiling. Back then, I believed we were still a family. Now I wondered if I had simply been standing in the picture while everyone else was already moving on. And then, my phone rang. The name on the screen wasn't Nathan. It was Tanya. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Marilyn," she said brightly, her voice almost cheerful. "We're finishing up the packing. Everyone's getting so excited." I waited. She continued talking as if everything were perfectly normal. "The kids can hardly sleep. Olivia keeps asking if she'll really see sea turtles." I smiled sadly. I had been the one who booked that excursion. She didn't know that. Or maybe she did. Maybe she simply didn't care. Then Tanya laughed softly. I just wanted to make sure everything's good on your end, financially. The final payments should clear tomorrow. Financially, not emotionally, not personally, financially. That single word told me exactly why she had called. Not to ask how I was doing, not to apologize, not even to thank me, to make sure the money was still there. I took a slow breath, then asked the simplest question I could think of. Is there anything you'd like me to pack for the children? Silence. Just for a second. What do you mean? She asked. I still have the motion sickness bands I bought, and some travel games. I thought maybe I'd bring them to the airport. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she laughed awkwardly. Oh, no. We've got everything covered. I didn't interrupt. She hurried on. Actually, we were thinking this trip might be good for you, too. I frowned. Good for me? Yes. Her voice stayed sweet, almost rehearsed. You deserve some rest. You've done so much. Maybe it's time to stay home. Relax. Focus on yourself. Focus on yourself. People often hide rejection inside kind-sounding words. This was one of those moments. She wasn't offering me peace. She was confirming my absence. The decision had already been made. I had never been part of their plans. When the call ended, I placed my phone on the counter without another word. Outside the kitchen window, the old birdbath James had built 20 years earlier sat perfectly still. Not a ripple disturbed the water. I understood exactly how it felt. That afternoon, I walked quietly to the hallway closet. On the highest shelf sat a small fireproof lockbox. James used to joke that it contained our fortune. In reality, it mostly held paperwork, insurance policies, old deeds, birth certificates, and one folder labeled Hawaii Travel Fund. I carried it to the dining table and slowly opened it. Every receipt, every deposit, every payment confirmation. 3 years, carefully documented. Finally, I found what I was looking for. The original account agreement. There, in bold letters, was my name. Account holder, Marilyn Rose. Monroe. Authorized users, none. Joint owners, none. Secondary access, none. I read the page twice, then a third time. Not because I doubted it, because I needed to remind myself of something. This wasn't their account. It never had been. Every dollar came from me. Every sacrifice belonged to me. Every payment had my name attached to it. I reached for my phone and opened the banking app. The familiar balance appeared. Travel Fund. 21,763 Toyota status.active.linked cards, 6. 1 assigned to the airline. 1 to the villa. 1 for the rental cars. The others connected to excursions, meals, and incidental expenses. Everything. Every single reservation fed by one account. Mine. And suddenly, a thought crossed my mind. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. They hadn't forgotten me. They had removed me. There was a difference. For weeks I had convinced myself there must have been a misunderstanding. Some miscommunication. Some unfortunate mistake. But there it was. In black and white. 8 passengers. 8 guests. 8 people enjoying a vacation funded by the woman they intentionally excluded. I wasn't family. I was financing family. That realization didn't make me cry. Oddly enough, it made me calm. Pain often arrives like a storm. But clarity is quiet. It settles over you until suddenly, everything you've been refusing to see becomes impossible to ignore. I made myself a cup of peppermint tea, carried it to James's old chair by the window, and sat. The house was completely silent. No television, no music, only the ticking clock and the soft tapping of tree branches against the window. For the first time in months, my thoughts stopped racing. I finally understood. They hadn't accidentally taken me for granted. They expected me to accept it. They believed I would smile, pay the bills, wish them a wonderful trip, and quietly disappear. Because that's what I'd always done. I'd always put everyone else first. I'd always chosen peace over confrontation. I'd always convinced myself love meant sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, my sacrifice had become their expectation. And expectations have a dangerous habit of growing into entitlement. That night, for the first time since receiving Nathan's text, I slept. Not because I felt better, because I had finally stopped asking myself why. The answer no longer mattered. The truth mattered. The following morning, I carried my coffee into the study and opened my laptop again. This time, I wasn't looking through old memories. I was making decisions. I logged into the travel fund, clicked the account settings, then selected linked transactions. The list appeared: airline.villa, airport, transfers, rental vehicles, excursions, restaurants. Every reservation connected to one funding source, one click away from being paused. Near the bottom of the page, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. Transaction lock beneath it was a small explanation. Activating freeze mode will immediately suspend all outgoing payments. Linked cards will decline until manually reactivated by the account holder. I stared at the words. One click. That was all. One click, and everything would stop. My hand rested lightly on the mouse. But I didn't press it. Not yet. Because once I crossed that line, there would be no pretending things could go back to the way they were. And despite everything, part of me still hoped Nathan would call. Not because he needed money, because he missed his mother, instead of freezing the account. I opened another window, a blank document. Without really thinking, I typed a title: People Who Deserve to Be Seen. Then I began writing names. Carol, a widow from church whose son hadn't visited in years. Louise, still carrying her late husband's photograph in her purse. Frances, who had practically raised her grandchildren, only to be forgotten when they graduated. Beverly, who once confessed she'd lived nearly 70 years without ever seeing the ocean. I looked at the list for a long moment. Something inside me shifted. Maybe, just maybe, the dream hadn't died. Maybe it simply belonged to different people. Just then, my phone vibrated. Nathan. My heart skipped. I answered immediately. But it wasn't a call. Just a text. Let me know if everything's ready with the account before tomorrow. Nothing else? Not. How are you? Not. Mom, I'm sorry. Not. Can we talk? Just the account. I read the message 3 times, then quietly placed the phone back on the desk. At that exact moment, the last piece of hope I had been holding on to finally slipped away. Because when your own child only remembers your name, when he needs your money, the problem isn't misunderstanding, it's value. And for the first time in my life, I realized they knew the price of everything I gave them, but not the value of the woman giving it. I looked at Nathan's message one last time. Let me know if everything's ready with the account before tomorrow. Not one word about how I was feeling. Not one question asking if I was okay. Not even the smallest apology for the message he'd sent 2 nights earlier. Just the account, just the money. I set my phone down slowly. For years, I'd convinced myself that love meant giving without expecting anything in return. But somewhere along the way, giving had become expected, and gratitude had disappeared. That realization Hurt more than anything Nathan or Tanya had actually said, because indifference has a way of cutting deeper than cruelty ever could. I wasn't ready to make a permanent decision. Not yet. If there was even the slightest chance my son would remember who I was, I wanted to give him that opportunity. Just one. I opened our text conversation and typed a simple message. Let me know if you'd like any help getting the kids ready for tomorrow. I still have some extra snacks and motion sickness bands. I'd be happy to bring them by. I read the message twice. There was nothing dramatic about it, yeah? No guilt, no accusations, no mention of Hawaii. Just a mother offering to help. I pressed send. Then I waited. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. 15 minutes. Still nothing. An hour. My phone remained silent. When I finally looked again, I saw the tiny word beneath my message. Read. He had seen it. He had simply chosen not to answer. That tiny word, read, somehow hurt more than the original text, because silence can say things words never will. At that moment, I stopped wondering whether there had been a misunderstanding. There hadn't. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't poor communication. It was a choice, a deliberate one. And suddenly, everything became painfully clear. To them, I wasn't family. I was funding, nothing more. I closed the messaging app, opened my banking application again, navigated back to the travel fund. The cursor hovered over the same button I'd stared at the night before. Freeze mode. One final warning appeared on the screen. Activating this feature will immediately suspend all linked transactions. Manual authorization will be required before payments can resume. I rested my hand on the mouse. For a brief moment, James crossed my mind. I imagined him standing beside me, not telling me what to do, just quietly reminding me of something he'd said years earlier. Marilyn, kindness doesn't mean allowing people to use you. I smiled through unexpected tears. He had always known exactly what I needed to hear. I took one slow breath. Then, I clicked. The screen refreshed. A blue notification appeared. Freeze mode activated. All linked transactions have been paused. Just like that. 3 years of financial access ended with a single click. No alarms, no dramatic music, no angry phone calls, just silence. The same silence they'd given me, except this time, it belonged to me. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. The afternoon sun filtered through the maple tree James had planted when Nathan was born. For years I'd watched that tree grow taller, strong enough to weather storms, strong enough to stand alone, maybe. It was finally my turn to do the same. I wasn't smiling because I'd won. This wasn't victory. It was acceptance, a painful one. But acceptance nonetheless. They had chosen a vacation without me. I had simply chosen not to pay for it. There was a difference. Over the next 2 days, I said nothing. When Tanya posted a picture of matching straw hats on social media with the caption, "Vacation mode," I kept scrolling. When Nathan sent a message in the family group chat saying, "Everyone ready for paradise," I didn't respond. Then my youngest granddaughter sent me a voice message. "Grandma, Daddy says we're going to see sea turtles. I'll tell you all about them when we get back." My heart nearly broke. I listened to her tiny voice 3 times, then pressed my phone gently against my chest. None of this was her fault, nor her brother's. Children only know the world their parents create for them. Quietly, I whispered, "I love you, sweetheart." Then I saved the recording one day, when she was older. Maybe she'd understand. That evening, instead of checking flight confirmations or hotel reservations, I opened a brand new spreadsheet. Across the top, I typed a different title. Those who deserve to be remembered. Underneath, I wrote names. Carol.Louise.Francis.Beverly, Nora, Denise. Women who had spent decades caring for everyone else. Women who knew what it felt like to be overlooked. Women who had given their lives away in quiet acts of love. As I looked at the list, an idea slowly began taking shape. The vacation didn't have to disappear. Maybe it simply needed different guests. For the first time since Nathan's text, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally felt free to imagine something new. Departure morning arrived. I woke before sunrise, made myself a cup of coffee, opened the curtains. The house was peaceful. Across town, I imagined everyone loading suitcases into the Uber, the children laughing, Tanya checking passports, Nathan assuming everything had already been taken care of. After all, it always had. At exactly 8:15 that morning, the time I'd quietly marked on my calendar. I opened the banking app one final time. Freeze mode remained active. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. I closed the app, then carried my coffee onto the back porch. The morning breeze felt unusually calm, almost as though the world already knew something they didn't. About 45 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Nathan. Hey, Mom. We're getting some weird errors at check-in. Can you look at the travel account real quick? I looked at the message, then locked my phone. 5 minutes later, another one arrived. The airline says the payment card isn't working. Then another. Can you call me? The calls started almost immediately after that. One, then another, then another. The ringtone echoed through the quiet house. I let every call go to voicemail. Not because I wanted revenge, because for once I refused. To rescue people from the consequences of their own choices. At 8:42, a voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen. At 8:48, another. At 8:53, 3 missed calls in less than 5 minutes. Finally, a text appeared. Mom, please. The kids are getting upset. Something's wrong with the account. Something's wrong. I looked around my peaceful kitchen. No, nothing was wrong with the account for the first time in 3 years. It was finally protecting the person who owned it. I walked to the window. Outside, birds hopped across the freshly cut grass. A neighbor waved while walking his dog. Life continued as though nothing unusual had happened, yet hundreds of miles away. Everything was beginning to unravel, and they still hadn't realized. It wasn't the bank that had failed them. It was trust. I stood by the kitchen window for a long time, watching the morning sunlight stretch across the yard. The phone wouldn't stop vibrating, call after call, message after message, for years. I had been the first person everyone called whenever something went wrong, a forgotten birthday gift, a last-minute babysitter, an unexpected bill a school fundraiser. I always answered always, but that morning, for the first time in my life. I chose silence, not because I wanted them to suffer, because I was finally tired of teaching people that my kindness came with unlimited access. At 9:03, another voicemail arrived, then another. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I pressed play. Nathan's voice sounded strained. Mom, I don't know what's happening, but none of the cards are working. The airline can't process the payment. They keep saying the account needs authorization. Can you please call me? I listened quietly. No apology, no mention of the text, only the problem. I deleted the voicemail. Minutes later, another one appeared. This time his voice was lower, more desperate. Mom, please. The kids are scared. Tanya's parents are asking questions. Just tell me what's going on. Again. Not one word about how they had treated me. Only panic, because their plans were falling apart. I placed the phone face down on the table. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves of James's maple tree. Somehow, It sounded like peace. At exactly 9:17, an email notification appeared. The sender was the travel agency. For one brief second, I wondered if something had gone wrong. I opened it. The subject line read, "Booking cancellation request confirmed." I slowly read every word. "Dear Mrs. Monroe, per your authorization as the sole account holder, all pending transactions connected to your travel fund have been suspended. Applicable reservations have been canceled, and refundable payments will be returned according to vendor policies. Thank you for your confirmation." I read it twice, then quietly closed the email. There it was. Everything I'd spent 3 years building, gone, not because someone stole it, because I had finally stopped giving it away. The phone rang. Again. Nathan. I didn't answer. Text arrived almost immediately afterward. "Mom, if this is because of the message, can we please talk?" I stared at those words. If this is because of the message, not. I'm sorry. Not. I was wrong. Not. I can't believe I hurt you. Just, Can we talk? Only now. Only after the money stopped flowing. There are moments in life when everything suddenly becomes crystal clear. This was one of them. If the cards had worked, my phone would never have rung. By late morning, I had more than 50 missed calls. Nathan.Tanya Ivane. Tanya's mother. Voicemail after voicemail. Text after text. The urgency in every message grew stronger, but none of them said the words I'd been waiting to hear. Not one person simply wrote, "Mom, we're sorry." Instead, they kept asking the same question in different ways. "Can you unlock the account?" That's when I realized something painful. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they missed my money. And those are two very different things. Around noon, I decided I couldn't sit inside any longer, slipped on my walking shoes, and headed toward the neighborhood park. The air felt warm. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. A little girl rode past on a bicycle with pink streamers, fluttering from the handlebars. Life looked so beautifully ordinary. A neighbor smiled as she watered her flowers. "Heading out for spring break?" she asked. I smiled back. "Not today," I said, "but soon." And for the first time, I actually believed it. When I returned home, the calls had finally stopped. Only one new message waited. It was from Nathan. Longer this time. "Mom, maybe we handled things badly. Maybe Tanya shouldn't have sent that message. The kids are already here and they're excited. We can work everything out after we get back. Please, just unlock the account for now." I read it carefully. Then, again, one sentence stood out more than all the others. "We'll work everything out after we get back." After. Not now. Later. Once the vacation was saved. Once they had everything they wanted. The apology could wait. My feelings could wait. My dignity could wait. As long as the trip continued. I gently locked my phone. No, that wasn't how respect worked. Respect doesn't begin after convenience ends. Over the next 2 days, the refunds began arriving one by one. First, the villa deposit, then the airport transportation, the rental vehicles, the snorkeling, excursions, the luau reservations, private, dining breakfast packages. Every notification made the balance grow larger. With each refund, something inside me also returned. Not just my money, my self-respect. For years, I'd confused generosity with obligation. Now I finally understood the difference. Giving should always be a choice, never an expectation. I opened the notebook where I'd once written every detail of the Hawaii trip, meal, plans, packing lists, emergency, contacts, activities for the grandchildren. Turned to a fresh page. Across the top, I carefully wrote 3 words. The forgotten women then. I began making another list. Carol. A widow whose children hadn't visited in years. Frances, who still wore her wedding ring decades after her husband, left Beverly, who spent nearly every day caring for her brother with dementia. Nora, who once told me the hardest part of getting older wasn't the aching joints. It was becoming invisible. Lucille A., retired librarian who had never seen the ocean. Denise, who drove me to doctor's appointments after James died and refused to let me pay for gas. 6 names, 6 women, 6 lives spent, quietly putting everyone else first. As I looked at that list, a completely different vacation began forming in my mind. Not one built on obligation, one built on gratitude. That afternoon, I picked up the phone. Carol answered first. Hello? Carol, it's Marilyn. Oh, hi, dear. I have a strange question. She laughed. Those are usually the interesting ones. I smiled. Have you ever been to Hawaii? Silence. Then a soft chuckle. Hawaii? Oh, goodness, no. What if I told you? I'd like to take you. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, she whispered, Why? I looked at James's photograph sitting on my desk, then answered, Honestly, because someone once taught me that beautiful memories should be shared with people who appreciate them. Carol started crying. So did I by the end of the afternoon. I'd made 6 phone calls. Every conversation followed the same. Pattern, disbelief, confusion, then tears. No one asked what they had to do in return. No one asked how much they'd owe. No one expected anything. They simply kept saying, Are you serious? You really mean me? You do that for us? And every single time, my answer was exactly the same. Yes, because after everything that had happened, I finally understood something. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who make you feel seen. Little did I know. The most unexpected message of all was still waiting for me, and when it finally arrived, it wouldn't contain an apology. It would contain another request for money. 3 days later, my phone buzzed again. By then, the house felt different, lighter. The constant ringing had stopped. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. I had already confirmed the new reservations. 1 villa, 7 days, 6 remarkable women. This time, every booking carried only one name. Mine. There would be no confusion, no hidden expectations. No one quietly deciding whether I belonged. I belonged because I was the one creating the memory. The email arrived just after breakfast. Subject, We need to talk, sender. Nathan. For several moments, I simply looked at it. Part of me hoped, foolishly perhaps, that this would finally be the apology I'd waited for. Not because I needed to hear, I'm sorry, but because I wanted to believe the little boy who once called me his hero was still somewhere inside the man he'd become. I opened the email. It began politely enough. Hi, Mom. He explained that the trip hadn't gone the way they'd planned. Without the prepaid reservations, everything had become expensive. Hotels, rental cars, meals, last-minute bookings. Everything had cost far more than expected. Then came the part that made my heart sink. I know things got out of hand before we left. Maybe we weren't fair. Maybe Tanya could have handled things differently. Maybe. Such a careful word. Small enough to avoid responsibility. Large enough to sound like accountability. I kept reading. Then I reached the final paragraph. We're in a difficult spot financially now. Since we had to pay for everything ourselves, we're carrying a lot of unexpected debt, if you're able. Could you send us part of the money back? We're still family. I stared at the screen, once, twice, 3 times. Not because I hadn't understood it, because I wished I hadn't. Even now, after everything, they weren't asking for forgiveness. They were asking for another payment. I slowly closed my eyes. A memory surfaced. Nathan, At 9 years old, standing on a chair in our kitchen, proudly serving me burnt toast he'd made for Mother's Day. "I wanted to surprise you," he'd said with the biggest smile. Back then, love had been simple. It wasn't measured in dollars. It wasn't conditional. It certainly wasn't transactional. I wondered where that little boy had gone. Or perhaps life had simply taught him that someone else would always cover the bill. I opened my banking records. Every payment for the original vacation appeared exactly as I remembered. Villa flights, transportation, activities. Every single charge came from one account. Mine. There had never been a shared fund. No family contribution. No deposit from Nathan. No reimbursement waiting somewhere. The money he was asking me to return had always been mine. The only investment they'd made was the assumption that I would never say no. I moved my cursor toward the reply button, paused, then stopped. What exactly was there to explain? That excluding someone while expecting them to finance. Your happiness is wrong. That respect cannot be purchased. That love without appreciation eventually becomes exhaustion. If those lessons hadn't been learned already, no email from me would teach them. I closed the message without responding. Sometimes, silence says everything. Words cannot. A week later, I boarded another plane. This time, not with my son, not with Tanya, not with people who viewed generosity as an obligation. I traveled with Carol, Louise, Frances, Beverly, Nora, and Denise, 6 women carrying decades of invisible sacrifices. The moment we stepped onto Hawaiian soil, something shifted. Carol stopped walking. She covered her mouth with both hands. "I never thought I'd actually make it here," she whispered. Beverly laughed like a child when she felt the warm ocean breeze. Denise stood quietly looking at the waves. "I've seen pictures all my life," she said. "They never captured this." Neither had words. The villa overlooked the ocean. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze. The waves rolled toward the shore with the same peaceful rhythm James and I had listened to all those years ago. I carried one small frame from my suitcase. James, smiling exactly as I remembered him. I placed his photograph at the center of the dining table. No one questioned it. No one asked me to move it. No one acted inconvenienced instead. Carol smiled softly. "He looks like a man who laughed often." "He did," I answered. "And he would have loved all of you." That first evening we shared dinner together. Not one person checked a phone. Not one conversation felt forced. Everyone listened. Everyone laughed. Everyone belonged. After dessert, Beverly raised her glass. "This," she said quietly, "is the first vacation I've ever taken where nobody expected me to cook." Everyone laughed. Then Frances began crying. I forgot what it feels like to simply exist without taking care of someone else. No one rushed to change the subject. No one looked uncomfortable. We simply reached across the table and held her hand. Because sometimes, being seen is the greatest gift another human being can receive. Each evening we lit a lavender candle beside James's photograph. One by one, each woman shared something she'd carried silently for years. A dream she'd abandoned. A goodbye she'd never spoken. A regret. A hope. Then one night I asked a different question. If you could tell your 30-year-old self one thing, what would it be? The answers stayed with me forever. You don't have to earn love. It's okay to rest. Don't disappear trying to keep everyone else happy. You matter, even when nobody says it. Finally. Everyone looked at me. I smiled, then quietly said, "Never mistake being needed for being valued." The room fell silent, not because anyone disagreed, because everyone understood. On our final evening, we walked barefoot along the shoreline. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The waves curled gently around our feet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. Free from chasing approval. Free from proving my worth. Free from confusing sacrifice with love. I realized something as I looked at the women walking beside me. Family isn't defined by who shares your last name. It's defined by who makes room for your heart. When I returned home, I never received the apology I'd once imagined. Nathan sent another short message weeks later. It wasn't angry. It wasn't warm. Just distant. Life moved on. And so did I. People often ask whether I regret freezing the account. My answer always surprises them. No, I don't regret protecting what I'd worked so hard to build. What I regret is waiting so long to realize that kindness without boundaries teaches people to take you for granted. The money was never the real lesson. Respect was, and respect begins the moment you stop apologizing for protecting your own peace. If you've ever given everything to people who only remembered you when they needed something. If you've ever sat at a table where your presence was treated as optional. Remember this, you are not difficult for expecting respect. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. And you are never too old to choose people who choose you in return. Because sometimes the family you're born into teaches you how to love. But the family you choose teaches you how to heal.